Grace and peace to you in Jesus Christ. What a privilege it is to be in the company of God's people today. Kathy last evening called us church nerds. We were in church on, if you're doing Friday and Saturday, that's kind of super nerd qualification. It's great to be here, great to be gathered with the saints on this beautiful day. As I have been praying and reflecting these past weeks in preparation for this, I've had to keep reminding myself that this is a plenary address, not a sermon. After so many years of preaching, everything it seems my kids say, tell me, turns into a sermon. So I want to share with you, though, what I believe that the Holy Spirit has brought into my heart, and I offer it to you for your discernment. And I should also say that I did not check with Michael ahead of time as to what text he was using for last night, which I would normally do, and to see which one I should use today, but as it turns out, we chose the same one. So maybe God is saying something. I will also say that I hope to cover a lot of ground here, and I will overstate some things to make a point. So I encourage you not to be sidetracked by thinking how I could have nuanced something a little bit better, but just give me the benefit of the doubt. So enough preamble, let's get to it. 5 years ago in January, our son Levi indicated that he wanted to join the baptism membership class at Foothills Mennonite Church where I was pastoring. Rose and I were excited, and the Pentecost party planning for May 27th began in earnest. I phoned my parents and invited them out for the event, and most certainly they would be coming, they said. And then my dad said, hey, if we have time, would you mind coming north with us for a while up to Beaver Lodge, Alberta, to see if we can find my parents' old homestead? Well, let's plan for it, I said. Great, he said. I will contact some of the relatives up there to say that we're coming. Well, so after the baptism weekend, we drove the 8 hours north to Peace River Country, and we got to our hotel around 6:30, and I was looking forward to just relaxing for a little while after a very busy weekend. And my dad said, I think I'll call them and let them know we're here. And I said, how about we wait till 7:45? Because then they'll think it's too late to come over tonight already to visit. And my dad said, sure. So at 7:45, my dad called. The conversation lasted 30 seconds. He hung up the phone and said, they're on the way over. So 20 minutes later, we were downstairs in the hotel pulling these tables together in the breakfast nook and together laying out a map of the whole county, which one of them had. And my dad had a piece of paper, just a little piece of paper that said something like line 2, concession 12. And the big burly guy at the table said, I used to drive the county grader for years. I know exactly where that is. And the next morning he came by in his truck and we followed, and 15 minutes later we pulled out to the side of this country road and we walked through the field, and there it was, the log cabin with the dirt floor. This is where they landed in 1926. The family only stayed for several years. The work was so hard, and the farmer holding the mortgage was dishonest. So they decided to leave, along with some others, for Tofield to work in the open coal mine. My Opa and his co-workers had to fill 1 boxcar per day with coal. Some years later, right after World War II, General Motors in St. Catharines was hiring, and they had one foreman who spoke German. So some families packed up and arrived in Vineland right when Vineland United Mennonite was coming into its own. Before long, a new building, a vibrant German school, bursting Sunday school programs, choirs, another building expansion, quilting circles, and in 1965, a new minister, J.K. Klassen from the faraway land of Winkler, Manitoba, came. And in 1973, when Grand Funk Railroad and Stevie Wonder and Diana Ross and the Doobie Brothers were topping the Billboard charts, the congregation made the decision to separate the German and English services. And it wasn't going to happen until J.K. implored the congregation and told them that this would result in a 25% increase of his workload, 2 sermons now on a Sunday, and he was not asking for further compensation. Well, they knew it must be important. Now, just the way I said that, it can sound a little bit belittling about the congregation, and I don't mean it to be. These were people who still carried some trauma from the Russian Revolution, and as we know, anxiety decreases when you're worshiping in the company of others who share the experience. And this is not just the experience of Vineland. Many of our Eurocentric churches among us would have been the same. Many heart language hymns and chorales and Low German conversation and potlucks, food, and so much good food, and safety in like company. But what was an attraction to others like-minded eventually became a barrier to those in the neighborhood who didn't share the same story. And as kids who didn't carry the trauma either, or at least not in the same way, they didn't feel like they fit. Fast forward 50 years, and many of these churches have limited Sunday school programs, if any. Their buildings are more than they need, and it's tough to pull together a choir, and the pastor's salaries, though lower than other similar professions, are the largest budget lines. And as far as Mennonite culture goes, we were amused, at least I was, at Ivan Emke's column years ago in the Mennonite Distorter, and more recently, Andrew Unger's satire in the Daily Bonnet. Amused, but also concerned because cultural peculiarities have become more of a societal identifier of what it means to be Mennonite than our expressions of faith in Jesus Christ. One more step down, if you'll allow me. What worries me even more is that, for the most part, I fear that we have forgotten or maybe even given up on the vision of the church, what it is to be for the world. Paul starts Ephesians 3 with this wide-angle lens, talking about how God and God's wisdom held on to the mystery of Christ until this moment, and it was revealed in the apostles, and Paul says, I am the least of them all, so that it can be shared beyond the bounds of the Freundschaft, beyond the Israelites to the Gentiles. And although Paul says, although I am the least of all the saints, this grace was given to me to bring the Gentiles the news of the boundless riches of Christ, and to make everyone see what is the plan of the mystery hidden for the ages in God, who created all things, so that through the church, the wisdom of God in its rich variety might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. This was in accordance with the eternal purposes that he has carried out in Jesus Christ our Lord, in whom we have access in boldness and confidence through him. Now, if I would have read these verses in Africa or in other places in the global south where 84% of the Mennonites in Mennonite World Conference are now located, there could have been a good number of amens and even some rousing applause and other things there. I mean, it's just, and I know some of that is cultural, I realize that. But part of it also is they have entrusted their lives to God's vision for the church as a vehicle through which the restoration of all of creation will come. The Laotian leaders have told us, we will drop everything for Jesus. Leaders in Vietnam and China have been jailed for it. And in Vietnam, it's the Mennonite church has been recognized as the church that led the way toward freedom because they weren't afraid to go to jail for it. Two objections I hear, and I hear them a lot. Doug, that sounds triumphalistic. We would prefer a more humble and confessional approach, admitting mistakes, inadequacies, and past abuses, of which there are many. Yes. And second, Doug, God works outside the church too, you know. Yes, of course we know that. These objections are valuable, and we cannot dismiss them, and we must reconcile the fallout of each of them. But it doesn't negate the fact that throughout biblical history, again and again, God has chosen people who repeatedly get it wrong. And I don't know why. I wish I knew why. Well, maybe I don't wish I know why, but sometimes we do get it right. We had just finished worshiping with the Mennonite church in Adama, formerly called Nazareth in Ethiopia. The building was packed to the rafters, and there was no cars allowed in the small parking lot because there were benches set up and a loudspeaker out for the overflow crowd. There was at least 500 people there, the majority of which were under 40. After the service, they wanted to show us the elementary school that they run. Of the 600 students enrolled, 100 of them attend for free because they cannot afford to pay. More than that, if they see a child living on the streets, the child is picked up and taken to the authorities are contacted, and if the child has no home to go to, the child is taken in by a Mennonite family and sent to this school. I didn't see any street children in Ottawa. The Mennonites make sure there are none. As we were in a van driving first to the school and then to the hospital where the Mennonite missionaries arrived and established the hospital in 1945, there was an elderly man in the foreground of this picture, I wish it was a better picture, who kept trying to sit beside me in the van. And I couldn't quite figure out what was going on until he said, "I want to tell you something." He had excellent English. "I want to tell you something." He said, "I did not have a good childhood. My life was in peril. I took a chance and came to the hospital that the Mennonites started here. I asked them for a job, and they hired me to be an orderly." "That's great," I said. And he said, "I'm not finished." And by this time we were walking around the hospital grounds, which is now state of the art. And he said, "You see this building here?" I said, "Yeah." It was like a little chapel. He said, "Every day the Mennonites would go in there for a time, and we would ask them, 'What are you doing in there?' And they said, 'Well, we're worshiping God.' Oh, he says, 'Oh, you're worshiping God so you don't get sick.' And they said, 'No, we've come to tell each other what we've seen God doing in our lives and in the lives of the patients, and we worship and give thanks to God for it all, and then we also pray for the many needs.' And he and the others said, 'Can we come in and join you?' 'Well, sure, you can.' And he went on to tell me breathtaking stories of how the peace of Jesus Christ transformed his life and the lives of other Ethiopians who worked alongside him. And in the end, he said, 'Do you know why I told you all of this?' And I said, 'Oh, I think you probably wanted to express gratitude.' 'No,' he interrupted. He said, 'I want to tell you this because I know in North America you're struggling. You're losing the vision for the gospel. And you're losing the vision for the gospel, and all I can say to you is, how dare you? How dare you keep the good news to yourself?' He said, 'It is my choice whether or not to follow Jesus, but withholding the good news from others, the good news that can transform their lives, that, my friend, is colonial.' Well, just then, Fanosi Legacy, who works with MCEC in Ontario, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, 'You just got told.' And I said, 'Yeah, did I ever?' In Thailand, witness workers Tom and Christine Puvong noticed that the towns in and around Royet, like bedroom towns, there's a lot of children hanging around after school and doing nothing. Together with other leaders, they began the Mennonite FC, the Mennonite Church Canada Football Club. They have shirts and they have a trophy and the coaches are all certified. Look at that shirt. It's a bit of a branding nightmare, right? The coaches are all certified. They call their churches peace houses in Thailand because of the baggage around the church name, and the Lord is adding to their numbers daily. Netherlands, in December, I had the privilege of preaching at the Doopsgezenkerk in Haarlem. What an honor. Constructed as a hidden church in 1638, and by hidden, I mean you can't see it from the road. After the service, Pastor Daniel, a young Colombian, took me and a couple of other young adults out to a restaurant attached to the church. The restaurant hires persons with Down syndrome or other developmental challenges to give them meaningful work. The place was packed. After lunch, we went over to the youth house. A youth from surrounding communities show up every Friday night and they stay till 10 p.m. During that time, they hang out, they cook supper together, starting at about 7:30 or so. There's always an activity. Sometimes it's dramatizing Bible stories. Other times it's conversation about relationships, mental health, life purpose. It's very unorthodox, but this is a lifeline to kids in the neighborhood. Philippines. To the Tagabawa tribe, up in Mount Apo and the island of Mindanao, Dan and Joji Pantoja, Mennonite Church Canada witness workers, have been made honorary members of this tribe because of their relationship with the tribe, for how they have been instrumental in bringing peace to the warring factions all over and around Mount Apo. I asked the chief why she and her people paid attention to Dan and Joji. Surely she's met many missionaries and others who have come. Why them? I said. And she replied, the Tagabawa people are polytheistic. We have a supreme God and we have many demigods who assist. But like many other indigenous peoples, the Tagabawa tribe regard the Limokon, the dove, as a messenger from the spirit world. We heed the direction from which the dove coos, and either as a warning or as good news. Your symbol in Mennonite Church Canada is a dove with a branch. You have come from the spirit world as messengers with good news. Doesn't that just about take your breath away? I could go on. But there is something else I should tell you. This past Thursday evening, when I was sitting down to put some of this on paper for this morning, our son Levi was with us, and I said, hey, and he had just given me a demonstration a couple of weeks ago on this Chat GPT that was out there. Does everybody know what that is, what Chat GPT? Yeah, those of you who are probably Marquessies are probably like, oh no. Right, Chat GPT is an open artificial intelligence chatbot that was launched in November. It's like a robot on those sci-fi shows that, you know, you ask a question and it researches and gives you just coughs up the answer. So for fun, I just said to Levi, I said, ask ChatGPT this. Write a 2,000-word plenary address for Mennonite Church Manitoba on the topic of reimagining the church. And let's see what it says. It wrote it in less than 2 minutes. And I will read for you paragraphs 3 and 4, and just listen to what it says. One of the key ways we can reimagine the church together is by being intentional about our mission and purpose. The church exists to be a witness to the love of God in the world, and we must be clear about what this means in practice. For too long, the church has been focused on preserving its own institutional structures and traditions, rather than being outwardly focused on the needs of the world around us. We must be willing to let go of these structures and traditions if they are no longer serving our mission and purpose. Paragraph 4. This means that we must be willing to take risks and try new things. We cannot simply continue to do things the way they've always been done and expect different results. We must be willing to experiment, to fail, and to learn from our mistakes. This can be scary, but it is also exciting, because it allows us to be open to the movement of the Spirit and to discover new ways of living out our faith. Now, just to be clear, artificial intelligence isn't prophesying here. It's simply gathering what we have been saying in sermons and on websites and in Canadian Mennonite articles and in presentations for years now. Artificial intelligence is telling us that we've been talking about reimagining the church for years. So why do we continue on the same trajectory? Why do we hesitate? In the days before the AGM at the Mesorata Christos Church in Ethiopia, the 50 executive ministers who would be Michael's counterparts were together for a leadership training day with Norm Dick and Fenose Legacy. At the end of the 3-day training, Norm asked the group, what is the key? What is the key to the rapid growth of the church in Ethiopia? And without hesitation, they shouted, prayer. A praying church is a growing church. Out of prayer then comes miracles, of which they have seen many, and then small groups and church plants. You can see the list. But the engine for it all is prayer. They are living out what Walter Wink pointed out to us years ago in Revelation chapter 8. We have the rich symbolism of the prayers of the saints being mingled together with the will of God, and after they are mingled together, they are cast down over the earth. And Walter Wink boldly states, history belongs to the intercessors who believe the future into being. Intercession visualizes an alternative future to the one apparently fated by the momentum of current forces. Prayer infuses the air of a time yet to be into the suffocating atmosphere of the present. What would it mean for us to stop using prayer as bookends, or as something that we do, or just simply include as an item in a worship service, and make it core, absolutely core to our own personal lives and to everything we do as faith communities? To search deeply about anything and everything for a direction, for a word. In a moment, you're going to look at vision and mission statements from your congregations. The one that MCM has together is in your report book, and for God's sake, and I don't mean that in any kind of way, any slang way. I'm saying it prayerfully, for God's sake. Please don't pick apart the wording and suggest how it could be updated or how certain words could be changed. Now's not the time for that. Instead, look at the main themes, the core or the essence of what is in there, and think about the elderly Ethiopian man who took a strip off of me in the van. And think about the chief of the Tagabawa tribe. And think about that awkward kid in Harlem who lives for Friday at 3:30 p.m. so they can go to the youth house with Pastor Daniel, where they are loved and cared for. And then think about your neighbors and your coworkers and the needs of people you cross paths with, and think big. Just to jumpstart your imaginations, this last week I was on a call with some other denominational leaders, and we were talking about ecumenical shared ministry, what we can do together. The sharing got around to me, and they asked, "What are you thinking about the future, Doug?" And I said, I think for the next while we're going to have to ride two horses at once. We need to maintain these centers for worship and shared life, our buildings, our gathering places, and bring our best energy to them. But the horse that we also need to learn to ride is the one that we need to ride in our neighborhoods, the places where each of us live. And I said, it's going to sound kind of strange coming from me. I said, a Mennonite, but we're starting to think more in terms of parish language and thinking about that again. And how do we care for the areas in which we live? Scott Sharman, the Anglican, said, "You folks have been writing about this for a little while already." And I said, yes. I said, but sadly, it's largely just stayed there as writing. And then I said, what if we together as Mennonites and Lutherans and Baptists and E-Free people could start thinking and praying together for our own neighborhoods about how we can be a people of God's peace, small groups, house fellowships, all of us together, and an embodied witness to the good news of Jesus Christ. And I think that's our way forward. While we still bring the best of what we have to our current congregations as well. And that was when the Lutherans said, now I think we're on to something. So this is all swirling around us globally and locally in the wind of the Spirit. Change is happening, and God is on the move, whether we choose to participate or not. There are so many more stories that I could tell you, but in conclusion, I will offer you this. I remember standing in that field up in Beaver Lodge just 5 years ago. And little did I know, and little did my dad know, that we would travel together to Thailand, where he would meet migrant workers from Myanmar and talk about the pain of their displacement, and meet house church leaders in Khon Kaen, and have a conversation with a former Buddhist, Muslim, now Christian business owner and house church leader in Hua Hin. And little did he know that he would celebrate his 82nd birthday with witness workers in Tokyo, all in the company of people in the global Mennonite church. My dad's heart nearly explodes when he talks about how big his church is now. And he's thinking expansively about back home as well. This is the wisdom of God being made known through the church, and we are headed, I promise you, for abundantly far more than all we can ask or imagine. Amen.